Console exclusives are actually anti-competitive, and not just anti-consumer. The best short summary I can think of is this: if a console or platform goes out of business without artificial exclusives, then nobody actually wanted that console or platform, and an anti-competitive business practice was artificially keeping it alive. If it survives without artificial exclusives, then it didn't need them. And that console or platform actually deserved your purchase because you wanted it based on its own features and services. Even if you don't find anything ethically wrong with exclusives, at least try to see it from the perspective that it is anti-competitive and thus counter to the idea of fair market capitalism. That's right, I'm fighting capitalism with capitalism. Even hardcore capitalists should be against artificial exclusives. This is mostly about consoles, but it also relates to streaming services in that they both have the same problem. Like Louis Rossmann says about right to repair, this needs to start with a culture shift of people speaking out and saying this isn't right before any kind of legislation. Let me be clear, this is not an attack on consoles. Even without artificial exclusives, there will always be a market for consoles because those gamers prefer its characteristics over open platforms like PC. There will just be increased pressure to innovate based on the console's actual features and services. I'm not saying you can't enjoy exclusives or shouldn't buy them. Just keep it in the back of your mind that exclusives are a bad business practice and at the minimum shouldn't be praised. Tell them I love your game, but stop being a dick and sell your games on other platforms, too. What do I mean by artificial exclusives? It's an exclusive that is only exclusive because the maker of the game has a vested interest in seeing the platform succeed versus other platforms. Either the platform owner also owns the game developer or publisher, or the game developer or publisher was paid money to offset the lost sales from not selling to the other platforms. The game should sell on its own merits, and the platform should succeed on its own merits. Natural exclusives are okay because they have actual reasons for why they are exclusive. Maybe the game just isn't possible to run on another platform. Maybe the developer can't afford to port to other platforms. Maybe a specific platform isn't economically viable for their game, such as their genre selling poorly there, or that platform just not performing well enough to justify the cost and resources spent porting, for example, Vita, Wii U, etc. Yes, I made up the terms artificial exclusives and natural exclusives. There needs to be a distinction between the two types. As an example, you should be buying Breath of the Wild on the Switch because it is a portable way to play the game, not because it is artificially the only platform you are allowed to play it on. Let's not get into emulators because you are still supporting anti-competitive business practices by buying the console and game to dump it so that you can legally play it on another platform. And they will still do everything they can to stop you from doing that, like patching out exploits and even updating the hardware so that new console purchasers can't play their games on an emulator legally. I've explained why artificial exclusives are anti-consumer, now let's get to why they are anti-competitive, and thus why even the strictest capitalist-leaning individuals should dislike artificial exclusives. If you buy all the consoles to buy all the games, or subscribe to all the streaming services to watch all the content, the consoles and platforms are by definition not competing anymore. In capitalism, fair competition is crucial to providing the best product or service to customers. In a healthy competitive market, if the users didn't like missing features in a console, they'd buy all their games on the console that has them and not buy the console that lacks those features. Even if they bought the console, by not buying their games there, they are denying the console manufacturer royalties from the sale or forcing them to give royalties to the other console manufacturer if it was their own game. To get that money back, that console manufacturer will be forced to innovate on its features and services. With artificial exclusives, if you want Mario Kart 8 on a console that supports native voice chat, not through a phone, you have no choice but to buy it on Switch because it is artificially exclusive. In the previous generation, if you wanted the PS4 Spider-Man game on the more powerful console for better graphics or smoother frame rate, you had no choice but to buy it on PS4 Pro because that was the most powerful console Sony offered and it was artificially exclusive. Or even further back, if you wanted a game exclusive to Xbox 360, you couldn't just buy it on PS3 to get it with free online play. Now all consoles charge to be able to play online and PC is the last place with free online play. If exclusives didn't exist, the console that paywalled online play would have not performed as well and we might have free online for all consoles today. Artificial exclusives mean the console manufacturer has no reason to provide those features or services. You can't just go buy that artificial exclusive game on the console that has that feature. Artificial exclusives discourage improvement of the platform and push new platform competitors, New consoles, video streaming services, etc., unfairly out of the market because they have to spend astronomical amounts of money creating or buying their own artificial exclusives just to compete due to the existing artificial exclusives, and that creates a feedback loop of more companies using anti-competitive business practices. A fair market needs to allow for the potential of newcomers to offer a better product, the product being the console or platform, and either replace stagnant platforms or force them to innovate to stay on the top. New platforms cannot compete on better features or specs because they don't have any exclusives. Why would a customer buy a new console competitor if it only has multi-platforms and none of the exclusives? You're better off with a console that has some exclusives and those multi-platform games, even if it's inferior in specs, features or services. It also encourages buying up the rights of third-party content, which doesn't improve their own platform or service and just directly harms every other platform and service. Even buying up the rights to a book adaptation or IP license harms the chance that a company could have adapted it into a show, movie or game that went to all the platforms. So even some original content like Amazon Prime's Invincibles isn't actually original and it is anti-competitive. Stadia is a perfect example of how artificial exclusives are anti-competitive and unfairly force new platform competitors out of the market, or make it extremely hard for them to do so. Regardless of what you think of cloud gaming, Stadia is essentially just a new console in the cloud. One of the major discussion points whenever anybody brings up Stadia is its lack of exclusives and how Google canceled their first-party studio plans. If even Google with its massive amounts of money decided that developing their own exclusives was too expensive, what chance is there for smaller companies trying to compete by providing a better console with better services? It is good for the consumers overall that Google decided not to pursue its own artificial exclusives, but bad for Stadia as a platform trying to break into the console market. As a PC gamer, I actually think that if I had to use a console, it'd be Stadia because it allows me the freedom to play it on virtually any platform I want. Excluding the platforms like consoles and iPhones that have an anti-competitive incentive to block cloud gaming. Granted, Stadia can run in the browser on iPhones, but a browser cloud gaming client will perform worse than an app. For a final summary, if your game, movie, etc. is not ported to an economically viable platform and your company can afford the porting, that is an anti-competitive action. The only reason not to put a piece of media on every economically viable platform is if they have an anti-competitive incentive to prop up a specific platform over the others and give it an unfair advantage. Even if they were a small company and couldn't afford the porting work, if another company offered reasonable prices and terms to port and license to another platform, the only reason to reject is if they have a stake in the platform it is exclusive to, or if they were already planning to port to that platform themselves soon. Now for some of the arguments I've seen people present for why console exclusives aren't anti-competitive. Streaming services do the same thing? That doesn't make it okay. If all your friends jump off a bridge, would you follow them? And I agree that streaming services have the same problem. It's okay for first-party games because the console manufacturer owns the studio? That still doesn't change the fact that artificial exclusives remove economic pressure to innovate on console features and services. Movie studios were forced a long time ago to not own movie theaters because that was anti-competitive. IP does not have equivalent substitutes like food or tools. McDonald's may be a substitute for Burger King, but Final Fantasy is not a substitute for Dragon Quest even if they are both JRPGs. Some could argue that platform owners paying to have artificial exclusives are just executing their right to a free market, but I'd argue that that is still anti-competitive, like when Intel paid retailers money to not carry AMD PCs. That's a bit like saying I have the free will to punch you and so cops shouldn't arrest me for punching you, but my free will ends where yours begins. By having artificial exclusives, they are removing economic pressure that would otherwise force them to directly improve their platform to entice customers. Even if they don't abuse it, that is still a red flag, like internet companies saying they won't sell your browsing data, but still lobbying to be legally allowed to do so. If they won't abuse that position, why do they want it so much? To some extent, the platform owner has to entice developers to get customers to want their platform, but there is a limit to that effect. If you're a third-party developer, and all the consoles are not to your standards, what you want in the console doesn't matter. You have to make your game for the popular platforms, or it won't sell as well. You have the same problems I've mentioned earlier if you decide to make your own console and make your games artificially exclusive to it. Look at the Switch and the impossible ports. Check out Modern Vintage Gamers videos on the subject. But to summarize the concept, an impossible port is called such because the developer had to spend tons of money to overcome the Switch's hardware limitations to port a technically demanding game, such as Doom. The reason why the Kingdom Hearts games on the Switch is in a cloud gaming format rather than running on the hardware is because of that huge cost of porting to an underpowered console. The publisher decided that the cost was not worth it. If the Switch was more powerful or had a pro version, it might have been running directly on the Switch hardware. But by that point, if you're paying for a cloud version because the console's hardware is insufficient, why aren't you allowed to play it on other platforms such as PC or other consoles? It's not even running on the Switch and the console is a glorified TV box at that point.